Holiness in Dress, a doctrinal treatise on visible holiness and the preservation of Yahweh's order. First Harvest Ministries International, Reverend John Shane Vaughn, Founding Apostolic Overseer. Section 1. The Visible Nature of Holiness. Holiness, as revealed in the Scriptures, has never been confined to the invisible realm of the human heart, nor has it ever been presented as a purely internal condition known only to Yahweh and the individual. From the earliest pages of the biblical record, from the burning bush where Moses was commanded to remove his sandals because the ground was holy ground, Exodus 3 verse 5, to the thundering summit of Sinai where Yahweh spoke his law amid fire and smoke. Holiness is shown to be something that takes form, something that is embodied, something that is made visible within the created order. When Yahweh called his people to himself, he did not whisper his demand into the secret recesses of the soul alone. He thundered it from the mountain. You shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. Leviticus 19, verse 2. And the Apostle Peter, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, would echo this same call across the centuries to the dispersed believers of Asia Minor. As he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. 1 Peter 1, verses 15 through 16. The demand spans testaments, cultures, and millennia, and it is comprehensive in all your conduct. But here, at the very threshold of this doctrine, we must pause and dismantle one of the most devastating lies ever told to the people of Yahweh, a lie that has paralyzed entire generations of saints, that has silenced entire assemblies, that has reduced the command, be ye holy, to an accusation rather than an invitation. The lie is this, that holy means perfect, and because the believer knows in the honest chambers of his own heart that he is not perfect, that he stumbles, that he falls, and that he carries scars and cracks and failures, he concludes that he cannot be holy. He reads the command of Yahweh and hears only condemnation. He hears, be perfect as I am perfect, and he lays down the calling altogether, convinced that holiness is a mountain he cannot climb. But holy does not mean perfect. It never has. The Hebrew word kadesh, the word Yahweh implored when he thundered from Sinai, does not mean flawless, sinless, or without blemish. It means set apart. It means separated into a purpose. It means taken out of common use and reserved for the service of the Most High. A thing is holy not because it has no flaws, but because it belongs to Yahweh. A thing is holy not because it has achieved perfection, but because it has been consecrated to a sacred use. Consider the vessels of the tabernacle. The brazen laver was holy, yet it was fashioned from the bronze mirrors of women. Ordinary metal shaped by human hands, and golden lampstands were holy. Yet it was beaten gold, struck and hammered into form by the labor of craftsmen. The altar was holy, yet it was made of smitten wood, a humble desert timber. None of these vessels were perfect in their raw material. What made them holy was not their flawlessness. What made them holy was that Yahweh had set them apart for the temple use. They were removed from the common sphere and consecrated to the sacred sphere. The consecration, that setting apart, was their holiness. A broken cup can be holy if it is set apart for temple use. A perfect cup in a pagan house is not holy at all. Let this truth land upon the heart of every believer who has ever whispered, I cannot be holy because I am not perfect. The shepherd king himself was a man after Yahweh's own heart, and he committed adultery and ordered murder. Moses was the meekest man upon the earth, and he struck the rock in anger and was barred from the land. Peter walked with Messiah 1 year, and he denied his Lord with cursing before a servant girl. Paul called himself the chief of sinners, yet each of these was holy, not because they were perfect, but because they belonged to Yahweh, because they had been set apart, because their lives were consecrated to his purposes, even through the cracks of their own brokenness. The confusion between holiness and perfection has been the devil's most effective disarmament of the saints. For if the believer believes he must achieve flawlessness before he can present himself as holy, he will never present himself at all. He will hide, he will shrink, he will decline the calling. And the assemblies of Yahweh will be emptied of the very vessels, cracked, mended, scarred, yet consecrated, that the Master intends to use for his glory. Holiness, therefore, is not an achievement to be earned. It is consecrated to be accepted. It is not the absence of flaws. It is the presence of ownership. It is not perfection. It is belonging. And when the believer grasps this, when he understands that his broken, imperfect, still being confronted life can nonetheless be set apart unto Yahweh and used by him, the command, "Be ye holy," ceases to be a crushing weight and becomes a liberating invitation. This understanding changes everything about the doctrine that follows. For if holiness meant perfection, then holiness in dress would demand flawless wardrobes, impeccable presentation, and a standard no saint could meet. But holiness does not mean perfection. It means set apart, and therefore holiness in dress means very simply dress that has been set apart unto Yahweh, dress that has been removed from the common use of the age, dress that belongs to him rather than to the spirit of the world. The cracked cup preaches as powerfully as the perfect one, provided the cracked cup has been set apart for the temple and not left upon the shelf of Babylon. The Creator who formed man from dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life did not design a faith that could be hidden within obstruction or dissolved into private sentiment. Rather, he established a people whose very lives, indeed, whose very appearance would testify to their covenant relationship with him. When Yahweh delivered Israel from Egypt, he declared his purpose with crystalline clarity. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Exodus 19, verses 5 through 6. A holy nation, not merely a collection of holy individuals, but a corporate people whose collective life would radiate the holiness of their king. The prophet Isaiah, when granted a vision of Yahweh's enthroned glory, saw the Sepharim covering their faces and crying to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Isaiah 6, verse 3. Holiness is not hidden. It fills the earth with visible splendor, and the people who bear Yahweh's name are called to reflect that glory in the sight of all nations. This principle is seen with particular clarity in the instructions given to Israel, where even the smallest detail of life were imbued with covenantal significance, where the threads of daily existence were woven into a tapestry of sacred meaning. Garments were not merely coverings for nakedness or protections against the elements. They were carriers of identity, visible declarations of allegiance and belonging. Consider Joseph, whose coat of many colors announced his favored position and provoked the wrath of his brothers. Genesis 37, verse 3. Consider Elijah, whose hairy mantle became so synonymous with his prophetic office that Elisha, receiving it, received also the double portion of his spirit. 2 Kings 2, verses 8 through 14. Consider John the Baptist, clad in camel's hair with a leather belt, his very dress announcing the fulfillment of prophecy and the nearness of the kingdom. Matthew 3, verse 4. In each case, the garment spoke before the mouth opened. But nowhere in this truth more pronounced than in the explicit commands Yahweh gave his people. The fringes placed upon the borders of their clothing, the tzitzit, were not decorative accents, mere embroidery for aesthetic pleasure. They were reminders, sacred memorials woven into fabric. Yahweh commanded Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and it shall be a tassel for you to look at, and remember all the commandments of Yahweh to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to war after. So you shall remember to do my commandments and be holy to your God." Numbers 15, verses 38 through 40. The garment became a sermon. The thread became a teacher. Holiness was literally sewn into the fabric of daily life. And the priestly vestments, the priestly vestments, they were not aesthetic indulgences, not the product of human artistic ambition. They were theologically constructed by divine commandment for glory and for beauty. Exodus 28 verse 2 and Exodus 40. The high priest did not approach the altar in common attire. He bore upon his person the ephod, the breastplate, the turban with its golden plate engraved, Holy to Yahweh, so that the one who ministered before the throne of the Most High did not only in function, but in visible representation. He was a walking, breathing picture of the people's consecration, a living symbol of the covenant between heaven and earth. Every color, every stone, every thread proclaimed a truth that words alone could not convey. In all of this, from the fringes of the common Israelite to the golden plate of the high priest, one truth emerges with unmistakable force. Yahweh has always required that which is true inwardly be made discernibly outwardly. Section 2. The collapse of the modern argument for neutrality. It is priestly at this point that the modern mind begins to reset. Contemporary culture, drunk on the wine of anonymous individualism, insists that appearance is morally neutral, that clothing and adornment are matters of personal preference, devoid of inherent meaning. Do not be conformed to this world, the Apostle Paul exhorted to the Romans 12 verse 2. Yet the world has succeeded in conforming the minds of multitudes to this very delusion, the delusion that the external is empty, that the visible is void, that the body and its covering are blank canvases upon which the self may paint without consequence. But the Apostle John, with uncompromising severity, warned, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." 1 John 2, verse 15 through 17. And James, the brother of our Lord, declared with prophetic fire, "Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." James 4, verse 4. The scriptures do not recognize a realm of moral neutrality. Every choice is situated. Every expression speaks. Every appearance either serves Yahweh or serves the spirit of the age. Yet this assertion, that outward appearance is meaningless, collapses under even the most basic observation of human society. No culture on earth has ever treated outward appearance as meaningless. None. From the corners of ancient palaces to the streets of modern cities, from the tribal villages of the Amazon to the fashion capitals of Europe, human beings have universally and inescapably invested their outward presentation with profound significance. A judge's robes not merely cover the body, it embodies the authority of justice itself. Strip it away and the courtroom dissolves into chaos. A military uniform does not merely identify a soldier. It communicates rank, regiment, allegiance, and the readiness to kill or die for a cause. A graduation gown is not merely fabric. It proclaims the completion of years of discipline and the conferral of academic honor. Mourning dress, black and unadorned, somber, speaks a language of grief understood across every continent without a single word ever being uttered. The crisp white coat of a physician, the soot-stained turnout gear of a firefighter, the ornament vestments of a monarch at coronation, each carries a freight of meaning that requires no interpreter. The man who claims clothing is neutral would, if consistent, have to argue that a police officer's badge is mere metal and a nation's flag mere cloth. Yet he knows, in the deepest recesses of his being, that this is a lie. If clothing were truly neutral, truly empty of meaning, truly a blank slate upon no significance is written, then why has every human civilization, in every epoch of recorded history, invested such enormous energy, wealth, and social regulation in the matter of dress? Why do armies enforce uniforms with disciplinary consequences? Why do courts of law require prescribed attire? Why do nations reserve certain garments for heads of state and punish their unauthorized use as criminal offense? Why do wedding ceremonies across the globe, from the simplest village rite to the grandest cathedral celebration, involve specially designated garments that are never worn on ordinary occasions. The question answers itself. The universality of the phenomenon is its own refutation. A wedding ring, though nothing more than precious metal in its physical substance, carries a covenantal declaration understood across the world, a declaration of exclusive fidelity, of sacred promise, of union before Yahweh and witnesses. It is a visible sign of an invisible bond, and it is treated with a reverence that defies the materialist's reduction. The ring is not the marriage, but it makes the marriage visible. It makes the marriage intangible to all who see it. Thus, the claim that outward expression is neutral is not only unbiblical, it is irrational. It flies in the face of universal human experience. It contradicts the testimony of every civilization that has ever risen upon the earth. It is a philosophical pretense, a fashionable delusion that serves no truth but the convenience of a generation that wishes to clothe itself without accountability. For meaning is not merely personal. It is not the private possession of the individual will. Meaning is communal. Meaning is covenantal. Meaning is established within the shared grammar of a people, woven into the fabric of their common life, and recognized, often without conscious thought, by all who share in that life. When a Christian dresses, he does not dress in a vacuum. He speaks a language. He sends a message. He declares an allegiance, or he obscures it. The issue is not whether something is inherently masculine or feminine, rebellious or righteous, but what it has come to mean within the shared language of a given people. Section 3. Paul the Nazarite and the language of nature. The Apostle Paul, writing to the assembly in Corinth, demonstrates a profound awareness of this reality, this inescapable truth that outward appearance is a language, that the body is a medium of communication, and that holiness must be expressed in forms that can be read and understood by the culture in which it is lived. When he addresses the matter of hair in 1 Corinthians 11, he does not construct his arrangement upon biological absolutes alone, but appeals to what calls nature. The Greek word physis, a term which is in this context encompasses what has become recognized, internalized, and accepted within a culture as fitting or unfitting. Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him, but if a woman has long hair, it is her glory? For her hair is given to her for a covering. 1 Corinthians 11, verses 14 through 15. Nature teaches, but what does nature teach? Not merely biology, not merely anatomy, but the accumulated wisdom of culture recognition, the deep consensus of what a people has come to understand as proper, fitting, and decent. Nature in Paul's usage is not raw physical data. It is the created order as it has been received, interpreted, and honored within a given civilization. This is made unmistakably evident by the tension that arises when Paul's instruction is placed alongside the Nazarite vow. That ancient consecration describes in the Torah with meticulous detail. Under the Nazarite consecration, long hair upon a man was not only permitted, but required, serving as a visible sign of devotion unto Yahweh. The vow is set forth in Numbers 6, verses 1 through 21, with solemn precision. When either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of the Nazarite, to separate himself to Yahweh, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. In all the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head, until the time is completed for which he separates himself to Yahweh. He shall be holy. He shall let the locks of hair of his head grow long. Numbers 6, verses 2 through 5. The long hair was not incidental. It was the visible signature of the vow itself, the outward mark that separated the consecrated from the common, the holy from the profane. And nowhere does this truth burn more brightly than in the life of Samson, the mightiest of Israel's judges, and a Nazarite from the womb. His long hair, unshorn since birth by divine command, was the wellspring of his consecrated strength, the visible token of Yahweh's spirit upon him. No Philistine could overcome him. No doorpost could withstand his strength. But when Delilah sheared those 7 locks from his head, the scripture records the devastating consequence with terrifying brevity. She made him sleep upon her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head, and his strength left him. Judges 16, verse 19. The same hair that had been a crown of holiness became in its shorn state the symbol of his betrayal, his humiliation, and his bondage. The Philistine gorged out his eyes and cast him into prison, and the hair that once proclaimed Yahweh's power now testified to his ruin. The same outward feature, long hair upon a man, communicated holiness in one condition and utter dishonor in another. This is precisely Paul's point. The contradiction between the Nazirite vow and the Corinthian instruction is only apparent. In truth, it reveals a deeper, more penetrating principle. The same outward feature may communicate holiness in one context and dishonor in another, depending upon the feature has grown to signify within the shared language of the people among whom it is seen. For the Nazirite among his own people, long hair was the badge of consecration, unmistakable honor, revered. For the Corinthian man in Greco-Roman culture, where long hair upon males was associated with effeminacy, pagan devotion, or moral looseness, the same feature would speak a radically different message. The symbol had not changed in substance, but its meaning had shifted across cultural grammars. Therefore, Paul is not legislating long length as a universal moral law, binding all men in all times with mathematical precision. He is regulating what the body communicates within the cultural framework in which it is seen. He is ensuring that the holy people of Yahweh do not, by their appearance, send signals that contradict the gospel they proclaim. This is the very principle that drives Paul's entire missionary strategy, the willingness to become all things to all people, not by compromise, but by contextual wisdom. Though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all. To the Jews I became as a Jew. To those under the law, I became as one under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 23. The gospel must be clothed in the grammar of the culture it addresses. It must be spoken in a language that hearers can understand, and that language includes the visual vocabulary of dress, adornment, and bodily presentation. For the holiness of Yahweh is not a shapeless abstraction. It is not a platonic ideal floating in the empyrean, disconnected from the textures of human life. It is a fire that must be carried through the world in vessels that the world can recognize. And if the vessel obscures the fire, if the outward form contradicts the inward reality, then the fire itself is hidden from those who most desperately need its light. Holiness does not change, but its visible expression must remain intangible. Section 4. When the church must read the meaning of an age. This principle carries forward into every generation, for the people of Yahweh have never dealt in timeless abstraction. They have always been called to read the moment in which they live, to perceive the spiritual grammar of their age, and to respond with the discernment that comes from above. If the people of Yahweh fail to communicate their distinctiveness in a way that can be recognized, they do not preserve holiness, they obscure it. They become as salt that has lost its savor, as a lamp hidden beneath a basket, present in the world yet indistinguishable from it. It is here that historical examples provide clarity, and it is here that the church must ask itself whether it possesses the spiritual acuity of the sons of Issachar, who had understanding of these times, to know what Israel ought to do. 1 Chronicles 12, verse 32. Our Lord himself rebuked the Pharisees and Sadducees for their failure in precisely this duty. Ye can discern the face of the sky, but ye cannot discern the signs of the times. Matthew 16, verse 3. The church that cannot read its own age is a church unprepared for the work Yahweh has assigned it, and the apostle commands. So then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Ephesians 5, verses 15 through 17. Redeeming the time requires understanding the time, and understanding the time requires the courage to see what the culture is saying through its symbols, its aesthetics, and its revolt against order. The necessity of cultural discernment is not a modern burden laid upon the church. It has been the duty of the saints in every epoch. The early Christians, living under the shadow of imperial Rome, were compelled to read the signs of their age with unflinching clarity. They refused the attire of the gladiatorial games, not because a gladiator's armor was sinful in itself, but because it bore the weight of blood sport, idolatry, and the celebration of violence. They refused the garments of insignia of pagan festivals, not because the fabric and dye were inherently corrupt, but because those forms had been saturated with meanings that contradicted the witness of a holy people set apart for Yahweh. They understood what too many in every generation forget, that the people of Yahweh must be able to read the culture in which they live, to perceive what forms and appearances have to signify, and to ensure that their outward presentation does not speak a language foreign to the gospel they proclaim. In the mid-20th century, as movements characterized by the rebellion and lawlessness rose to prominence with unprecedented cultural force, certain outward appearances became associated with those movements in ways that could not be ignored. The beatniks of the 1950s cultivated a dishevelled, anti-establishment aesthetic, unkempt hair, dark clothing, and studied rejection of polish and propriety. As visible manifesto against the social order, the Hells Angels and the burgeoning law motorcycle culture adopted leather garments, rugged facial hair, and a deliberate brutality of appearance as badges of defiance against every institution of restraint. Rock and roll rebellion seized the airwaves, and the imagination of generation wrapping itself in an aesthetic of transgression. Long hair on men, scandalous attire, a deliberate repudiation of the clean and the ordered. These were not mere fashion trends, they were manifestos. They were declarations of war against the structures of authority, the bonds of decency, and the very concept of a people called to live under divine government. The Holiness movement, perceiving this association with a clarity born of spiritual vigilance, responded by calling its men to present themselves differently, to remain clean-shaven, well-groomed, orderly in dress and demeanor. This was not a capitulation to mid-century American convention. It was a deliberate act of counter-testimony. The clean-shaven face, the neatly pressed garment, the disciplined appearance, these became for the generation of saints a visible refusal to be assimilated into the spirit of the age. They were a declaration. We do not belong to the rebellion. We belong to the kingdom. This was not because facial hair had suddenly become sinful, for the scriptures themselves give no such condemnation. Rather, it was because the appearance had taken on a meaning that contradicted the witness of a holy people. The object remained neutral. The message did not. Section 5. The present hour, from rebellion to confusion. The present generation finds itself in a similar, though more insidious moment. The dominant culture current, not merely one of rebellion, but of confusion, particularly concerning the distinctions established by Yahweh in creation, where previous generations of rebellion at least acknowledged the categories they sought to overthrow, the authority they defied, the order they transgressed. The present spirit denies that the categories ever existed at all. It does not merely kick against the pricks, it declares that there are no pricks, no goad, no ox, and no driver. This confusion is not incidental. It is demonic in its architecture, for its ultimate target is not a custom or a convention, but the creational order itself. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1 verse 27. The assault upon this binary is an assault upon the very grammar of creation, an attempt to unmake what Yahweh pronounced very good and to replace it with a chaos that mirrors the confusion of Babel, where God established distinctions were dissolved in the name of human anatomy. Genesis 11, 1-9. This is precisely the confusion the Apostle Paul identified in the pagan world. Their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman. Romans 1 verses 26-27. The natural use, the creational order, the distinctions written into the fabric of the cosmos was exchanged for confusion, and Isaiah's prophetic lament has never rung more true than in our moment. Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness. Isaiah 5 verse 20. We do not merely live in an age of rebellion. We live in an age that has lost the capacity to name rebellion, that has rechristened dishonor as liberation and called the dissolution of creation by the name of progress. Symbols, styles, and forms of expression have emerged which function as signals of gender fluidity, of the rejection of fixed identity, and of the resistance to the very categories of male and female. Clothing in every culture and in every age functions as a systematic system, a grammar of meaning by which human beings communicate identity, allegiance, and role without uttering a single word. The law of Yahweh recognized this reality long before modern sociologists named it. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all that do so are an abomination unto Yahweh thy God. Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. This prohibition reaches deeper than fabric. It reaches to the meaning conveyed by fabric, to the cultural language in which garments participate. Yahweh's people are forbidden to speak sentences in a grammar that contradicts his creational design. Within this environment, it is no longer sufficient to argue that a given object, be it a cosmetic, a garment, or an accessory, is neutral in itself. The relevant question is what that object communicates within the cultural system in which it is employed. A man who in a previous era might have worn a particular color or style without contradiction may find, in this hour, that the same form has been seized by the spirit of the age and rewritten with a meaning hostile to the order of Yahweh. The question is never merely, what is this object? But rather, what does this object say in the world in which I now live? When a man adopts forms of expression that the culture recognizes as feminine, he does not operate in a vacuum. He participates in a language that has already been defined, a language whose vocabulary has been composed by the spirit of confusion, whose grammar has been structured by the dissolution of creational distinctions, and whose ultimate authority in this enemy of all that Yahweh has made. He does not merely wear a garment, he speaks a word. He does not merely apply a cosmetic, he pronounces a sentence, and the sentence he speaks is not his own invention. It is the sentence that has already been written by the rebellion of the age, a sentence that contradicts the binary established at creation, a sentence that announces to every observer that the distinctions of Yahweh are negotiable, that male and female are social constructs to be toyed with rather than sacred categories to be honored. The man who so dresses does not merely express himself, he participates in the confusion. He lends his body to a lie. Chapter 6. Holiness as assignment, not prohibition. For this reason, the doctrine of holiness in dress must be understood not as a collection of prohibition, but as a matter of alignment. The believer is not merely avoiding certain items. He is refusing to align himself with messages that contradict the order of Yahweh, and this alignment is not passive negotiation. This alignment is not passive negation. It is positive, active, deliberate obedience. The Apostle Paul commands, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Romans 12:1. Holiness in dress is nothing less than the presentation of the body, a conscious, willing offering of one's entire visible existence to the glory and order of Yahweh. It is not the grudging avoidance of a list of forbidden things. It is the glad consecration of oneself to a higher purpose, the outward manifestation of an inward transformation, the visible evidence that the believer has been transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of God's dear Son. Alignment means walking in step with the Spirit. It means ensuring that every thread, every choice, every appearance declares allegiance to the kingdom, rather than the complacency with the confusion of the age. This requires restraint, an increasingly foreign concept in the age that equates freedom with the absence of limitation. That mistake, the indulgence of every impulse for the fulfillment of human dignity, yet the Scriptures consistently affirm that not all things are lawful or beneficial, and that liberty must be governed by love, by wisdom, and the awareness of one's actions affect both the witness of the individual and the integrity of the body. All things are lawful, but all things are not expedient. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 12. All things are lawful to me, but all things are not edifying. 1 Corinthians 10:23. Liberty is not a blank check. It is a stewardship. To the Galatians, Paul writes, Brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Galatians 5 verse 13. And Peter adds the solemn caution, as free and not using your liberty for a cloak of meticulousness, but as the servants of God. 1 Peter 2 verse 16. The believer who cites his freedom in Messiah as justification for whatever he pleases has misunderstood the very nature of the freedom he has been given. True liberty is not the abolition of restraint. It is the capacity to choose righteousness, to align oneself with the order of Yahweh, to present one's body as an instrument of holiness rather than an instrument of confusion. Restraint, far from being a relic of an earlier and more representative age, is the fruit of the grace of Yahweh at work in the human heart. The proverb declares, He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Proverbs 25 verse 28. A city defenseless, exposed, vulnerable to every invader. And the Apostle Paul teaches that the grace of Yahweh has appeared for precisely this purpose, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in the present world. Titus 2 verses 11 through 12. Grace does not loosen the belt of restraint, it forges it. Grace teaches us to deny. Grace instructs us in the discipline of refusal. Grace empowers the believer to look at a lawful thing and say, this is not beneficial. This is not edifying. This does not align with the witness I am called to bear. Therefore, I will not take it up. That is not legalism. That is the fruit of the Spirit, the evidence of a heart that has been captured by a greater love and a higher calling. The age which we live will mock this restraint. It will call it bondage, repression, the death of authenticity. But the Church of Yahweh has heard such accusations before, from the builders of Babel, from the prophets of Baal, from the cultured despisers of every generation who mistakes license for life and indulgence for joy. The believer knows better. He has tasted the liberty that comes from alignment with the will of Yahweh, and he has found it sweeter than every temporary gratification the spirit of the age can offer. He does not dress to avoid rules. He dresses to declare allegiance. He does not restrain himself from fear of punishment. He restrains himself from love of the one who first loved him, and from the wisdom that knows the devastating power of the compromised witness. Liberty that refuses restraint is not liberty. It is license. Section 7. The Holy Assembly as Visible Declaration. Nowhere is this responsibility more acute than within the context of the Holy Assembly. When the people of Yahweh gather, they do not come together as isolated individuals expressing personal preference. They come together as a visible manifestation of divine order in the earth. The assembly becomes, in fact, a living declaration of what Yahweh has established. As the apostle to the Gentiles declared, God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33. Let all things be done decently and in order. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 40. Where the world disperses into chaos, the assembly must concentrate into clarity. Where the age unravels distinction, the gathering of the saints must weave it back into visible, embodied form. This is not a mere social convention. It is a sacred vocation. The assembly is the body of Messiah, built up by the joint operation of apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, till we all come in the unity of the faith. Ephesians 4, verses 11 through 13. And that body is not merely functional, it is priestly. Peter writes, a holy priesthood, a royal nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness. 1 Peter 2, 5 and verse 9. The assembly, therefore, does not merely contain witnesses, it is witness. Every gathering is a visible sacrament of divine order, an embodied testimony that Yahweh has not abandoned the earth to its own devices, but has established a people who walk in his statutes and keep his judgments, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. Hebrews 10, verse 25. And what is this exhortation, if not the mutual reinforcement of a visible, legible, unmistakable holiness? For this reason, clarity is not optional. It is essential. In a world increasingly marked by ambiguity, the gathering of the saints must be a place where distinction is unmistakable. The Corinthian assembly, for all its disorders, received from Paul the clear instruction that women praying or prophesying should do so with their head covered, because of the angels. 1 Corinthians 11, verse 10, a phrase that signals cosmic significance of visible order in worship. If even the angels observe the assembly, how much more must the watching world? And if the world looks upon the gathered saints and sees the same confusion it sees in the culture around it, what testimony remains? It is within this framework that the practice of requiring distinctly feminine attire, such as dresses or skirts for women in the assembly, particularly those in position of visible example, must be understood. This is not an elevation of fabric to the level of holiness, nor is it an imposition of arbitrary tradition. It is a deliberate act of visible alignment, a refusal to allow the confusion of the surrounding culture to infiltrate the representation of the people of Yahweh. When a woman enters the assembly, clothed in attire that has borne the universal testimony of feminine distinction across centuries, civilizations, she does not merely dress herself. She declares a creational truth. She says, without speaking a word, that Yahweh made male and female, that the difference is not peripheral but essential, that the order established at the beginning still governs the present age. In like manner, Paul instructed that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety. 1 Timothy 2, verse 9. Paul links the visible presentation of the woman in the assembly not as personal expression, but to the reverent comportment fitting a house of prayer. The dress is a declaration, the skirt is a sermon, and the assembly, which is the living declaration of Yahweh's order, demands nothing less than the full participation of every member in making that declaration visible, legible, and unmistakable. Section 8. Private life and public representation. Furthermore, a distinction must be maintained between private life and public representation. Modern thought often rejects such distinctions, insisting upon a uniformity of expression across all contexts. Yet Scripture consistently demonstrates that greater visibility carries greater responsibility. The Lord Messiah himself, who was ever sinless, withdrew into desert places and solitary mountains to pray. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. Mark 1, verse 35. He withdrew himself into the wilderness and prayed. Luke 5, verse 16. Yet, when he presented himself publicly, he did so with full intentionality, as one who knew that every eye upon him was an eye that would render account for what it saw. If the Son of God observed this distinction between the private and the public, how much more must those who bear his name? Our Master taught plainly, "For unto whomsoever much is given, or him shall be much required, and to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more." Luke 12, verse 48. This is the arithmetic of stewardship. The more visible the position, the greater the accountability before heaven. James warns, "My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation." James 3, verse 1. Paul instructs Timothy that a bishop must be blameless, and adds the piercing requirement that he must have a good report of them which are without. 1 Timothy 3, verse 2 and verse 7. To Titus he writes that an elder must be blameless as the steward of God, Titus 1, verses 6 through 7. And here the key term emerges, steward. A steward does not own, he manages. He does not act for himself, he acts for another. And when one stands before the assembly or before the world, one manages not one's own reputation, but the reputation of Yahweh himself. This is why the apostle warns, giving no offense in anything, that the minister be not blamed. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 3. The minister of the gospel is an ambassador, as Paul declares. We are ambassadors for Christ. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20. An ambassador does not speak his own words. He speaks the words of the king who sent him. He does not dress according to his own taste. He wears the insignia of the nation he represents. And when that ambassador steps into public view, he carries the weight of an office that transcends his person. What a man or woman may do in the privacy of their home does not carry the same weight as what is presented before the assembly or before the world. This is not hypocrisy, it is stewardship. The moment one steps into public view, whether as a member of the assembly or not, more so as a leader, one is no longer merely living, one is representing. The elders among the flock are exhorted, feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock. 1 Peter 5, verses 2 through 3. An example is, by definition, visible. A pattern is, by necessity, public. And the one who serves as an example does not have the luxury of ambiguity. For the flock's vision of what Yahweh requires is shaped, for good or for ill, by what they say and those who lead them. And representation demands intentionality. Section 9. The question of allegiance. In the final analysis, the question of holiness and dress is not a question of fabric, nor of cosmetics, nor of isolated culture artifacts. It is a question of allegiance. This is the language of covenant, and covenant leaves no room for hesitation. When Joshua stood before all Israel, he cried, "Choose you this day whom ye will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh." Joshua 24, verse 15. He offered no third option. When Elijah confronted the wavering multitude on Mount Carmel, his challenge cut to the bone. How long halt thou ye between two opinions? If Yahweh be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. 1 Kings 18, verse 21. The Messiah himself declared, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." Matthew 6, verse 24. And to the church at Laodicea, the Spirit spoke with unsparing severity. "Because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth." Revelation 3, verse 16. Neutrality is not a virtue in the economy of Yahweh. It is a verdict. Every outward choice participates in a larger conversation, declaring either alignment with the order established by Yahweh or accommodation to the spirit of the age. Under the Old Covenant, every Israelite bore visible marks of covenantal allegiance: circumcision upon the flesh, fringes upon the garment, the blood of the Passover upon the doorpost. These were not private devotions. They were public declarations. They said to the watching nations, "This one belongs to Yahweh." The new covenant believer is marked not by blood upon the lintel, but by the indwelling of the Spirit. Yet that inward reality must produce an outward visibility. James asked with prophetic ferocity, "Know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God?" James 4, verse 4. Paul frames the choice in the starkest of terms. "Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness?" Romans 6, verse 16. Allegiance is not a feeling, it is a yielding. It is not an intention, it is a servitude. And what a man or woman puts upon their body is among the most legible signs of whom they have chosen to serve. In a time when the lines of distinction are being systematically erased, neutrality is no longer possible. The cultural war over gender and identity is not a political skirmish. It is a spiritual battle. against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6, verse 12. In war, there are no bystanders. Every civilian who claims neutrality is, in fact, allowing one army to pass through their territory unopposed. Every believer who claims indifference to the matter of dress is, whether they acknowledge it or not, casting a vote for the prevailing disorder. The woman who puts on a dress enters the public square as a walking endorsement of creational distinction. The woman who puts on trousers and a t-shirt enters the same square as a walking endorsement of culture erasure. These are not private choices, they are public votes, cast in the great referendum between Yahweh's order and the enemy's confusion. To refuse to communicate clearly, in effect, to communicate confusion. Section 10. Conclusion. Holiness that speaks. Therefore, the people of Yahweh must recover the understanding that holiness is visible, that it is legible, and that it speaks. The Messiah commanded his own. Let your light to shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 5, verse 16. Light is, by its nature, visible. It is not light if it cannot be seen. And holiness, if it is true holiness, must shine, not for the sake of display, but for the glory of the one who kindled it. Peter proclaims the vocation of the church with words that ought to burn upon every believer's conscience. You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. 1 Peter 2, verse 9. A peculiar people, a people set apart, marked distinguishably. And why? That ye should show forth. The holiness is not merely for God to see. It is for the world to read. Yes, holiness must be legible. The Apostle Paul tells the Corinthians, ye are declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in fleshly tables of the heart. 2 Corinthians 3, verse 3. The believer is a letter, not hidden in a drawer, not locked in a private study, but held open, read by all men. And what does the world read when it looks upon the people of Yahweh? Does it read separation or assimilation? Does it read distinction or disappearance? The command rings down through the ages with undiminished authority. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith Yahweh, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 17. Paul exhorts the Philippians, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world. Philippians 2, verse 15. Shine as light, not flicker, not dim, not hide beneath a bushel, but shine, blaze, illuminate the darkness with unmissable radiance of a people who belong to another. The issue is not whether the world can understand every nuance of our expression, but whether it can mistake us for its own. Titus declares that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works. Titus 2, verse 14. A peculiar people, zealous, not tepid, not accommodating, not endlessly explaining why they look no different from their neighbors, but burning with the fervor of those who have been purchased at an infinite cost, and who now live for the glory of their Redeemer. And Paul drives the point home with terrible clarity. God hath not called us unto uncleanliness, but unto holiness. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 7. Holiness is the calling, visibility is the method, and testimony is the result. So the question stands before the church of this age, as it has stood before every generation. Will the world see a difference, or will the church be undistinguishable from the culture it was called to transform? Will the assembly of Yahweh present a visible alternative to chaos of the age, or will it dissolve into the same ambiguity, the same confusion, the same erasure of creational distinction? The testimony of holiness is not preserved by good intentions. It is not preserved by private convictions that never cross the threshold into visible practice. It is preserved by men and women who rise up and say, with their bodies as well as their voices, we will not be conformed to this world. We will be transformed. We will be distinct. We will be holy. For if there is no distinguishable difference, then the testimony has already been lost. Issued in the name of Yeshua, the head of the assembly, Reverend John Shane Vaughn, founding apostolic overseer, the apostolic assemblies of the house of Israel. FHM.